Okay. Yes. Okay, so thank you everyone for being here, also online, and welcome to the analysis student seminar. Today the speaker is Roberto Marchello, and he's going to speak about Flutter in soft active rods and shells, theory, simulations, experiments. Please, Roberto.
Thank you. Thank you, Niccolo. Thank you, Niccolo. Thank you, Michele, for being here. Thank you for everybody being online, even if you're not here. Today, I would like to talk about, I would say, maybe 2/3 of my PhD research here at SISSA, under the supervision of Professor Giovanni Muselli, who is online, and Davide Riccobelli. And yet to talk about maybe what I'm studying, what I'm doing in the mechanics group. And in particular, so my research is focused on mechanics in general. So mechanics, how forces act on system, how system exhibits shape changes, deformation in general, bodies exhibit shape changes, deformation in general, when some kind of forces are exerted on them. And in particular, my interest is on the mechanics of materials that are soft, in the sense that they can undergo large deformation, even if small applied forces are applied on them. That are active, in the sense that they have the capability to transform some kind of external energy, external source of input into internal mechanical work. And in particular, I am also interested in slender structures, such as rods and shells, when 1 or 2 dimensions are much bigger with respect to the others. And in particular, because they can undergo also, they can be exploited in actuators, in biorobotics, etc., but they can undergo also very easily mechanical instabilities. And speaking of instabilities, I will focus this part of my this talk, so this part of my research on Flutter, which is mechanical instabilities that says a system undergoing blowing up oscillatory motions, losing stability, losing an equilibrium, losing the stability of one equilibrium, undergoing blowing up oscillatory motions that eventually may lead to self-sustained oscillations and limit cycles in general. This is one example. I will show you in details about this example of a plate made of polyelectrolyte hydrogels. So an example of soft active material that, in response to a simple electrical field, external electrical field, exhibit this complex range swimming trajectory. So let's talk a bit about some example of these soft active materials I've mentioned. For example, they can be liquid crystal elastomers that respond to variation in the external room temperature, can shrink on a large when the temperature is varied. Or again, such liquid crystal elastomers may also respond to light, to diverse and various luminous stimuli, changing their shape. Or again, gels that can respond to complex chemical reactions embedded inside the matrix, or they can be programmed in a way to generate certain shape at 3 dimensions at the fabrication stage. Or again, systems that can respond and, for example, lose stability like this when a certain magnetic field is applied. The system that is stable becomes unstable and have 2 bistable configurations. Or complex magnetic field can be exploited to generate actuators that can drive fluxes at a low-Reynolds-number, for example, and generate net thrust at a certain direction. And in particular, it has been shown that complex responses, as I mentioned at the beginning, can be achieved from simple stimuli, inactive rods, for example, through Flutter instability. Which is Flutter instability is a dynamic instability that I said before. Let's see. Oscillations of growing amplitude, and this in the group, for example, has been observed in the growing of plants. This is the work of one PhD student of some years ago, Daniele Agostinelli, in which a plant growing under the effect of the gravity. Once the gravity has an important because of the continuous growth of the shot, it undergoes these oscillations that eventually lead to large amplitude limit cycles. And these have been also reproduced in gels, in polyelectrolyte hydrogels that respond to external electric field. And in this work, it has been shown that such gels can exhibit self-sustained large amplitude oscillation under the action of a constant electric field and on the action of gravity. And such oscillations are more reciprocal in the sense that they are not time reversal. Yes, they are not time reversal, and they can be exploited to generate thrust at a low Reynolds number, and they can be exploited to fabricate, for example, micro robots that can swim at the direction of the electric field. These are instances of Flutter instability that, as I said before, is a dynamic behavior consisting of blowing up oscillatory motion. From the point of view of mathematics, how to see if a system undergo Flutter instability, for us, it's just a way to say that if you have a system, a dynamical system, it's nonlinear in general, you find an equilibrium, you want to study the stability of this equilibrium, so you linearize around it, you study the eigenvalues of the linearized matrix, and you pick the one with the largest real part. And for me, I say that system is in Flutter if the real part is positive and the imaginary part is not zero. So sometimes it can be an instance of optimal application where limit cycles are reached, but sometimes not. And of course, if you want to say that it is an optimal application, you have to prove it and you have to compute the eigenvalues explicitly. Sometimes you can, sometimes you cannot. And this just to say that in our system, we will see in the next slides, once the mechanical system is built, we rely on linearization of the equation to understand whether Flutter may occur or not, and to predict upon the model parameters when Flutter may occur. But then a linear solution with this eigenvalue will just exponentially grow in time, and to see the actual limit cycles, if it is reached or not, you have to rely on nonlinear simulation. In fact, if you simulate something that is linear, you just see a growing amplitude oscillation exponential in time. It is not feasible at a certain point once the nonlinearity becomes important. Whereas if you solve numerically or analytically, if you can, a system which is nonlinear, maybe you have the possibility to see these complex behaviors. So basically, it is. So the ideas are that soft active slender structure may respond to simple stimuli via Flutter, exhibiting complex behaviors. Okay, and in particular, I'm studying these polyelectrolyte hydrogels, as in the previous slide I mentioned, that actively respond to electric fields through mathematical and mechanical modeling, numerical simulations, and physical experiments. And I'll show you, I would say, 2/3 of my PhD research, because there is another project that I'm not showing here. If you want to come to my PhD defense, you will see, because of course you will be there because you will have your defense too. So today I would like to talk about 3 projects. 2 that concerns the mechanics of slender rods in 2 dimension and 3 dimension. The first in collaboration with Ariel Boiardi, the second in collaboration with Ariel Boiardi, Pietro Santucci, Lady Ricobelli, and Giovanni Noselli, and the third one concerning shells, so extension of such models in more complex structures, in collaboration again with Pietro and Giovanni. And in the last part, we'll see also some experiments. Okay, so to start, the motivation of the first problem is that if you have such gels that oscillate in response to the electric field, if they are free, as we've seen before, they can swim. If they are clamped at one end, they generate thrust. So particles in the fluid are pulled because of the oscillations, as you can see in this reconstruction, it's the simulation. And of course, if you turn the electric field, you can have oscillation at a certain angle, always at the angle of the electric field. But the idea is, can we design material and geometric properties of such rods to generate thrusts at certain angle with respect to the electric field? The application in these are basically in microfluidics and in actuators, because you can think of an array of ciliary carpets in which each filament, each rod can be programmed to generate thrust at a certain angle. So that put together, they can generate complex fluxes and complex thrusts in the fluid. And the result, I'll show you how, is that if we embed the rod with a natural curvature, we are actually able to generate a thrust at a certain angle, but in response to an electric field that is straight in the vertical direction. So the modeling part of this is rely on morphoelastic theory of rods in two dimension, which actively responds the form in response to electric fields. And I just go very briefly on this. A rod for us in two dimension can be identified with a curve, and you can identify a curve R that makes an angle theta with the vertical, a tangent, and a normal. And since the problem is in two dimension, it is enough to identify the rod. In this way, you have no twists or something like this that would need a proper modeling also in three dimensions. And you write the balance equation. If you don't know it, it's fine, and just focus on what are the key ingredients here to say what are the key ingredients here to have Flutter and to have the elasticity. Of course, these gels are in fluid solution, so the fluid structure interaction with the external environment need to be taken into account. We are doing this in the simple possible way with a viscous drag that is just linear with respect to the velocity of the filament with two coefficients. And I want to focus just on why and why this rod is called morphoelastic, not just elastic, and how we can encode the activity in response to the electric field. If you have a rod that is straight, an elastic rod that is straight, it generates a moment, a bending moment if you curve it. So if you curve it, you generate a bending moment, you have elastic energy on the rod. If the rod is elastic, purely elastic. What we do here is endow the rod with a natural curvature in the sense that the stress-free configuration is not anymore straight, but it is curved as an arc of a circle. This configuration is stress-free, and if you want to generate a moment, you have to curve, you have to bend it starting from this configuration. And then to encode the activity, you add another curvature that is the curvature that would make the rod stress-free, which is an unknown. It is not a constant. It is unknown, and it depends on the specific stimuli we are going to consider here. And since from experimental observations, we see that such gels respond to electric fields with bending if there is a component of the electric field in the direction along the thickness of the gel. And the curvature that the gel obtains is maximum when the electric field is perpendicular to the filament and is null when it is parallel to it. So that if an electric field is applied to a straight filament, it is basically, there is no effect. And this can be encoded with a time-evolving spontaneous curvature that is a phenomenological law, which after a transient time tau, say that this kind of curvature evolves towards a certain parameter kappa, that is the target maximum curvature that can be attained here. And this, as I mentioned before, is because of the internal structure of the gel. I will say something maybe more in detail about it. And I will just to say that experimental observation that guide this. For example, if you have different initial configuration and you apply the electric field, you see basically what I said that if the gel is straight along the electric field, there is no response, and otherwise it bends dependingly on how how they were the initial configurations. The idea here is that something that is called a differential swelling. Why this is happening? Because of different complex reaction complex responses that occur inside the matrix between the ions, coions, and the negative particles that are embedded in the matrix. What happens is basically that the same thing that would happen if you consider two strips, elastic strips, you stretch them differently so that the strips are different length. If they are not attached, you can of course stretch them and they can have different length. But if they would be attached together, you not have anymore this configuration, but what would happen is that two strips attached must bend so that one can be larger, can be longer than the other, and they have to remain together. So basically, if you think of the example is what is called the Timoshenko bilayer. If you think not to stretching things, but of having the two strips of metals that when you increase the room temperature, they increase the length because they dilatate, because they are metals. They do it differently because they are different metals. And if they are not attached, they of course have different lengths. And if they are attached, you see that they have this curvature. So even if the mechanic is very, very complex and very different, basically what happens is something very similar, that the gel, once you apply the electric field, would want like to shrink from one side and enlarge from the other side. Instead of doing this, it goes more or less, just to say what's happening, just to give you an idea. And then you build the machine, as I mentioned before. You have a mechanical system which is nonlinear. You find the equilibrium configuration, which in this case are not straight because you endow the filament with a natural curvature. So when you apply the electric field, this rod will unwind until a certain limit angle is reached. And once you find this equilibrium configuration that can be written analytically, you linearize around it. And so from a nonlinear system, you arrive to a linear system. You want to find the stability, so you assume such time harmonic expansion is like searching for the eigenvalues. It's basically the same thing. But at this point, this is not D and K are not matrices, but are differential operator because the system X at is depend on S. So if you want to compute the eigenvalues, you will need, for example, once of the if you can solve the problem analytically, that's fine. Sometimes you cannot, and you can rely on, for example, family statization to actually have discretized matrices that you can compute the eigenvalue. And again, so you can understand whether the system is in a stability regime or in a Flutter regime, in the sense that if you perturb such equilibrium configuration, you get basically nothing, so oscillations that return to the equilibrium, or have Flutter, so oscillation that grow in amplitude until maybe a limit cycles can be reached. And the result here is basically that if you have a certain region of stability and instability, if there is no natural curvature, so the filament is straight. Once you increase the natural curvature, you would need some electric field to unwind it until a limit angle is reached, and then you can have again you can reach again the region of Flutter instability. And the idea is that we could generate a thrust at a certain angle with respect to the stimulus. And this is actually done. To understand it, we can compute the total drag, the system, the total drag the rod exert on the fluid. And I'm interested in its time average over one period, of course, because we're looking for a cycle, cyclic shape changes, and in particular, if the angle this time average does with the vertical, because we want to understand how the thrust is with respect to the electric field. And these are basically the results that say that this angle that the filament is exerting with respect to the electric field is more or less with a strong agreement to the limit angle one could compute from the previous slide from the equilibrium configuration. And so the system exhibits Flutter, and it exerts a force at a certain angle, and it does at the expense on the total thrust, in the sense that the magnitude of the total thrust decreases if you want to increase the angle. And this, for example, here at right was basically the video that I showed you before. So basically, this from this part is the result is that endowing the filament with a natural curvature, you can have a truss at a certain angle, and if you want to increase the angle, you can do at the expense of the total force you are generating on the fluid. To stay within the same line, in the second work that I will just mention in just one slide, we extended the model in 3 dimensions. So from the mathematical mechanical point of view, it is more complicated, but the response of the gel of the rod to the electric field can be generalized also in 3 dimensions. And in particular, we have seen that complex results arise varying the cross-section aspect ratio. What I mean that now the gel is a 3-dimensional rod with a certain cross-section that we consider in general elliptical. And once you build the machine, so understand the stability and instability of the problem, you see that if the cross-section is a circle, you can have region of stability and region of instability, in which flutter may occur in all possible directions, because the rod can move in all possible directions because of the cross-section is circular. But once you have a cross-section that is elliptic, not circular anymore, you have different kind of stability regions in which flutter may occur in one direction only, in the one principal direction only, or in the other principal direction, or in a combined, or basically in both. So expecting a combined complex oscillation in 3D. And this is very sensitive to the initial perturbation you do in simulation, in nonlinear simulation, because if you, I will start the video in a second, if you perturb the system just in one plane, there is no reason why it should go in the other plane and generate 3-dimensional shape changes. Whereas if you actually perturb it in 3D, you will see that the shape changes that the filament undergoes are actually 3-dimensional. But they do in very different times. For example, here you may think that the system are doing the same thing, and it seems, but here at the right, it has reached the limit cycle. Here at the left, there are very small oscillations that are increasing in the other direction. Very, very small, until they becomes visible also in the other direction, generating complex shape changes also in the other direction with different times and with different dynamics.
You started with imposing some natural curvature.
Here, no, here there is no natural curvature. You just have this rod that is straight. It can respond to electric field. Okay, so you're studying the equilibrium of the straight configuration.
Okay.
Here there is no natural curvature, and you just perturb it like you would do, like in this way, in one direction, or like with a position in one direction, maybe a velocity in the other to trigger also the other plane. Okay, then for the rest of the talk, I would like to discuss about the last project. It is basically the main project of my PhD that concerned the extension of such models to more complex structure, in the sense that we not consider any more rods, but we're consider 2-dimensional structure, because we are interested in how shells in general, so plates or cylindrical shells or whatever kind of shells made of the same polyelectrolyte hydrogel may respond to electric stimuli, may exhibit shape changes, instabilities, etc. From the mathematical point of view, so for us, a shell is can be seen in the assumption of unshearability. That means basically that something like this, like you would do with the deck of cards, this cannot happen. If you assume that this cannot happen, which is basically true if the shell is enough thin, so very, very thin, you could identify a shell with a surface in 3D. So you could use all the tools from a differential geometry of surfaces in 3D that you know. So basically, the reference configuration of our shell is just a surface in 3D identified by a certain map F0 from the set of parametric, from the parametric domain, which is the set where the curvilinear coordinates live. Okay, and in the reference configuration, of course, once you set the map F0, you can compute the basis vectors, the normal, the metric, and the curvature, which are the first and the second fundamental forms of the surface in 3D. After the deformation, we have the actual configuration, the current configuration will be identified by another surface, which is identified via a displacement vector field. And if you know the displacement, of course, you know also the current shell width surface, and you could compute metric and curvature tensors also on the deformed configuration. But why the shell is called non-Euclidean? Because I forgot to mention before that the fact that our material actively responds to the electric field in the theory of shell may be encoded in using the theory of non-Euclidean shells, and explaining why our shells are called non-Euclidean, because the stress-free configuration is not the reference one, as you would do with normally elastic shells, but they are identified via a natural state, which is identified via a natural active metric and an active curvature. But this metric and curvature are not the first and the second fundamental form of a surface in 3D, in the sense that a map F bar do not exist. Okay, this is why the shell is called non-Euclidean, because this cannot be embedded in the Euclidean space, in the three-dimensional Euclidean space. So the strains and the band, all the strains are measured with respect to this natural active state, which in principle you do not know, and it depends on the activity of the material with respect to the electric field or whatever you may want to consider. And I'm just going very quickly. G measure change of metric with respect to the current configuration in the natural state. So if you stretch, for example, a surface, and R measure change of bending, so change of curvatures. If you change the curvature of the surface, you bend it, you generate G or R, and the N and M are the corresponding forces. So forces related to stretching and moments related to bending. The important thing here is that the elastic energy, the total elastic energy, so it's the sum of a stretching part and of a bending part. And there is a different scaling with respect to H, which is the thickness of the shell. N is scales with H. The stretching part scales with H. The bending part scales with H to the power of 3. This means that since our shells are thin, H will be small. So to have stretching will be energetically more costly than to have bending. This is why, for example, if you have a sheet of paper, you cannot stretch a sheet of paper, but you can very easily bend it in all directions you want. Okay, with this in mind, now we want to specify what these natural metric and curvatures are for our gels. And again, I'll go maybe just for I'll show you again this time when we talk about experiments, but because of the complex internal structure of our gel, we have seen that they respond to electric field if there is a component of the electric field along the thickness. For example, a one-dimensional gel in this way will have no response, whereas in this way will bend with a characteristic time and a target curvature, as we've seen for rods. What would happen in shells? Of course, in this case, the actual configuration we have seen at the video before, at the experimental video before, are state in which the system is at zero energy because of the activity. And this natural state can be current, can be reached. We're not talking about non-Euclideanity in rods, for example, because there is just this bending. Whereas in shells, there is no preferred direction, there is no implied preferred direction, so the curvature would generate in all possible directions would be spherical. And this can be encoded, can be shown, that can be encoded in the model, saying that the active metric is the same as the reference one, but the active curvature is the same as the reference one, minus or plus, it depends just on the convention, a spherical term, a spherical curvature. That is, this spherical curvature would arise if you put the gel in this way. And the problem is that this natural state cannot be current because a surface cannot have the same metric, but changing the curvature with a double curvature because of Gaussian aggregation. And because that says that the Gaussian curvature is an invariant under isometries. So this is not possible. And this is basically how, again, the shell is called nonlinear. Okay, so what will happen is that instead of having this at the current as the current state, maybe the shell would prefer to just bend in one direction, accumulate energy, but to not stretch. Okay, with this in mind, then the equations, maybe just going very quickly, can be generalized into dimension by the principle of visual work, with the viscous drag, with the external electric field, with the external viscous environment is modeled again in a very simplified way, linearly with respect to the velocity. Okay, now we're going to see some results. So you have to choose the geometry of the shell you want to consider. And the first thing we have done is consider plates. So if you plates that are elliptic, so elliptic plates, to understand if whether the 1D model could be easily extended, because of course, if you consider a plate where when one axis is much smaller than the other, you would basically have the same result you would have in a dimensional setting. So once you fix at 0, you can do whatever you want, in the sense that you have your equation written and you can solve numerically the equations. And here I just want to show you how to see the non-Euclideanity again, because the target curvature that will make the plate stress-free is Euclidean, but the metric would be spherical. So this cannot be reached. This cannot be possible. So a stress-free configuration is not reached, cannot be reached. Any state of the plate would be always with a residual stress inside, not zero energy, but is possible. In this case, the equilibrium is trivial, so no displacement and no curvature. And again, with the same machine of before, you can understand whether the system is in a stable regime or in a flatter regime in which we expect oscillations of growing amplitude. And here I would just wanted to say that since the linearized system involves a bilaplacian, to solve via the finite element methods using conforming elements, you would need something like the Argyris element, which was used in the simulation and in the linear stability results. Also, this was done fixed the lambda, so fixed lambda 2/3, because it will be the one that we will use in experiments. But you can change also the one of the semi-axis and consider different geometries, and plotting not only the maximum eigenmodes, the eigenvalues, but also the corresponding eigenfunctions, which are the eigenmodes that are the shape that you expect that your plate will exhibit when increasing the amplitude of the oscillations. And what we see here is that basically they are very, very similar. And just, okay, there is a different geometry, so they are a bit different, but basically they are very similar. And what happened is that they exhibit the ellipse and the circle, they exhibit a double curvature. And they do because plates are peculiar in this sense, because the linearization if you perform the linearization, the flexural problem, so which concern bending, so activity in our case, and the stretching problem decouple. So our bending problem here do not see the stretching part. So this Gaussian curvature is reached because there is this decoupling of the energy. So this means that in real results, in real experiments, and in real nonlinear simulation, we will expect that these shapes when the oscillation will be high, will be prevented in some way, because we will expect that such plates will have almost no Gaussian curvature or very slow, so something like ruled surfaces of developable surfaces or something similar. And this is the case of what will happen. In fact, we just see now some simulation. Even if the ribbon is considered, so the ratio is 1/10, you see this oscillation of growing amplitude if you are in the Flutter regime. And it is basically how very similar to the results we've seen from the one-dimensional case in the first video that was the work of Ariel and Giovanni. And for example, here plotting the transverse displacement with respect to time, you see the oscillation. They are growing very slowly. At a certain point, the exponential part becomes important. And once the nonlinearity becomes important because the displacement are high, then in this case, this limit cycle is reached. And once the limit cycle is reached, you see the ribbon swimming at the direction of the electric field. What happens if you consider different geometries? Now, different geometries implies that something different would happen. The transient here is a bit complicated and strange, but at a certain point, the limit cycle is reached, but with some difference between the video that I showed you before. Because the main differences are that we actually see something that seems a ruled surface. So as expected, there will be not much Gaussian curvature here. And there is an asymmetry between the amplitude of the transverse displacement here at the left and at the right. This leads the circle to have a trajectory that is not actually straight, as was in the ribbon, and also suggests, and this is verified by plotting the trajectory of material points here, that this plate, the circular plate, is also rotating. And this can be observed by plotting time by time all the transverse displacement of these 3 points and plotting the trajectory of these material points. So even if it's not seen, this plate is actually rotating. This is because of this asymmetry. So what turns out is that the straight swimming becomes unstable if the plate is sufficiently, let's say, not ribbon, but proper an ellipse or a circle, leading to a trajectory that is at a certain angle and with a complex response in terms of rotation. So, of course, the circle is symmetric. You cannot see the rotation if you do not plot these points. But if you do the simulation with an ellipse, you will see both the fact that the surface will be ruled, so expecting almost zero Gaussian curvature, with this asymmetry with respect to right and left, but in this case, of course, you see it rotating properly, even if you do not plot the trajectory of material points. And what happens here is that if the electric field is above the critical value of Flutter, you start rotating, but at a certain point, you may stop. Or if it is well above the critical value, if you increase a bit the electric field, you can have this complex trajectory that I showed you in the first slide at the beginning. So you rotate, but then it changes direction, rotate on the other side, and continuing this behavior periodically. So we could identify like a very small period in terms of shape changes and a larger period in terms of what happens from here basically to here. Okay, that was it for the numerical simulations. But then, as I mentioned before, we have not limited ourselves to numerical simulation for concerned plates, but we have also, with the very help of Pietro and Giovanni, fabricated and performed the experiments at the laboratory here at SISSA. Now, for the third time, I come back to this picture, but maybe now I show you something better, which is how is a gel made? In the sense, what are the components? The gel is made by a polymeric chain. So there is a polymeric matrix formed by polymeric chains and cross links between the chains. And the concentration of crosslinks basically gives you how much stiff is the gel, in the sense that if you imagine these crosslinks are much more distributed, the gel will be stiffer. And then it is made polyelectrolyte, so it can respond to electric field because there are also fixed charges embedded within the matrix. And then it actively responds to electric field, not only because of the fixed charges, but because the gel are in a ionic solution, so basically water with sodium chloride, salty water, as you would do with pasta. So here is the recipe of the pre-gel solution you would need before the gel. So basically, acrylamide gives you the polymetic chains, bisacrylamide gives you the crosslinks, sodium acrylate gives you the fixed charges, and then there is an initiator because there will be the formation of the gel will be catalyzed when UV light is applied. And then we will need fluorescent spheres because for many reasons, but basically because these gels are transparent if you fabricate them without any fluorescent sphere, so you actually do not see them anymore. You cannot take them. If you have also fluorescent spheres, once you apply a certain UV light, a certain LED light, you will have them respond to the light and see, for example, in green or in any color. It depends on the sphere you put inside. So what happens is that you have this pre-gel solution. You put this solution between two glass slides, and you project the shape you want to fabricate, an ellipse, for example. Inside, you project this shape on this solution. So once the UV light is on the solution, the photoinitiator trigger the chemical reaction. They make the gel fabricated, basically. So you end up with plates of the dimension of the shape and the dimension that you have projected, which is once they are swollen in salty water, are of in our experiment are of this dimension that are basically 7 millimeters long and 30 microns thick, more or less. So I would say that we are in the thin assumption that we have said before, because there are more than 2 orders of magnitude of difference between the lengths. And once you have your plates made of gel, you can put them in a petri dish with salty water with 2 electrodes that are attached to an electric current. Of course, you apply a certain voltage at the electrode, and so with a good approximation in the middle between the electrode, you would have a constant and uniform electric field. You place your gels inside them, and hopefully you will see something happen. And this is the case in the sense that you see that basically, at least qualitatively, the experiments are in agreement with the numerical findings, in the sense that we see complex swimming trajectories arising in these plates as an instance of Flutter. And when I say complex, I mean that we can both have the moments in which the plate swims almost straight or is rotating as in our simulations. And on this, I would like also to say that through stereo DSC, which is an optical technique, maybe like maybe I do not give the details here, but the important thing is that through this technique, basically exploiting the fact that you could measure exactly through this technique the displacement of the plate, and the fact that we are using 2 different cameras to record the images, so it works like our eyes, I would say. If you have 2 different cameras that can look at the object and you know the displacement, you can reconstruct the whole three-dimensional shape of the objects, and you could do it at different instants of the oscillation of the experiments. So you can fix a time. You have the transverse displacement here. It is plotted, and you see the shape in 3D. And I would say that this confirms also the numerical finding regarding the geometric nature of plate's configuration, in the sense that what we actually see is a surface with almost no Gaussian curvature, as expected by the numerical results. You can continue doing this. We've done it 7 times, showing also the traveling waves that is traveling at the opposite direction with respect to the electric field. Okay, and then very quickly, just to say, yes, very quickly, just to say that, as I mentioned, the model was built in a general way. We have seen results for concern the plates, but we have also results for concern cylindrical shell, for example, because cylindrical shell are maybe prototype to this equilibrium configuration is an equilibrium when the electric field is applied in this longitudinal direction. So expecting some traveling wave happening in the cylinder, something actually we expected, and it's something that is actually happening. And here I just want to tell you that the machine is basically the same, but what you can do is that, exploiting the fact that there is a periodicity in the circumferential direction, you can write out the unknowns in Fourier series, and you can decouple the system, going from a 2-dimensional system into an infinite number of 1D equations that are decoupled, which means that you could solve for every n, for every circumferential mode, you could solve separately all the equations. So you can understand not only whether the system is in the stable or in the Flutter regime, but you could also predict on the model parameter which would be the circumferential mode shape that will arise in the simulation in the Flutter. So, for example, in this regime, you expect n equal to 2. In other regime, you expect n equal to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, for example. And you could predict it upon the model parameter via this assumption, via this dimensional reduction. We do not have fortunate experiment of this, but the simulation here, I would say that agree with the model, and differently from plates. Here, also at the linear level, the problem is not decoupled between stretching and bending. So there is a much stronger agreement between the eigenmodes we've seen before and the actual shape that arise in the linear simulations once the limit cycle is reached. If you would plot, you see that you could have something like oscillation of growing amplitude until a limit cycle is reached. And if you do not perceive it because it's swimming not so much, I would say, but it is also swimming in the sense that it's not rotating, but it is moving in the direction of the electric field, as would have done the ribbon, for example. But the order of magnitude here is very different. So what would happen is that in some cycle of shape changes, you do not see me swimming very much. Okay, so I would say that this was it, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto. Is there any question here or online?
No, I would say that we more or less know anything about it. No, I would do. Yes.
Yeah, curiosity.
I'm still, yes.
In the second part, when you have the shell, the elliptic one. So you said that if it is somehow flat, it travels in the direction of the electric field.
Yeah.
Right. And if you start making it more circular, you get that periodic shape. But then when you get a circle, do you still have some periodic behavior, or?
When with periodic behavior, what do you mean?
I mean,
maybe we
if you
can go to the
slide
to the simulation.
Yes,
just
once.
Yes.
So one was there was it was traveling in the direction of the electric field.
The ribbon was traveling exactly the direction
Exactly.
of the electric field.
And the other one had a periodic movement.
Okay. So
Like when you have the circle, like in the slide, yes.
Yeah.
You see a very large period or something not understood.
Now here, what happens is that it is rotating, and it start doing it because numerically we understood that the straight swimming could be possible in the sense that if you numerically constrained the plate to swim straight, you could see the solution.
Okay.
But once you remove such constraints, it starts swimming at a certain direction.
Okay.
And differently to ellipses, here it just continues swimming at this direction forever, continue rotating and continue swimming.
Okay. Makes sense.
Whereas on the ellipse, since when it rotates, it exposes a different length to the electric field. So the effect of the electric field is different. And for example, you can have this rotation that then arrests at a certain point, or you can have a rotation that starts and then start on the other direction. Whereas in the circle, this does not happen because it's a circle, so it exposes always the same part on the electric field.
Okay, so if there is no question,
Thank you.
You can thank Roberto.
Thank you
Again.
Grazie.
Next one is
Next
Friday.
next Friday for sure. Maybe there is another one from the numerical group on 27, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Okay.